Welcome to Sanguine Arts Locavart, the podcast that features interviews with local Twin Cities artists. This activity is made possible by the voters of Minnesota through a grant from the Metropolitan Regional Arts Council, thanks to a legislative appropriation from the Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund. I'm your host, Mary Prescott, interdisciplinary artist, composer, and pianist. Today, we are speaking with Ryan Stopera, photographer, filmmaker, producer, educator, and director of community programming and PF Cafe at Public Functionary. Ryan has worked with community organizations for over 15 years, including with individuals experiencing homelessness, children and families, and foster care youth, as well as in program development and affordable housing development. Ryan's background in social work and his relationships across communities make collaboration essential to his work, whether in creative projects such as filmmaking or making space for connection, such as producing community events or program development. Working in community, creating connections, and sharing stories with each other is what drives Ryan's work. Welcome, Ryan, and thank you for speaking with us today.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
So, Ryan, today's a pretty big day for you because you're going to be premiering your new film, Serenity, later this evening. Congratulations.
Thank you so much.
Could you tell us a little bit about the film?
Yeah, it's both 4 or 5 years in the making and several lifetimes in the making. It's a story about my family, and I'd say most specifically myself, my sister, father, mother, my late sister, late father. So it's really been a culmination of all those lives. And I wrote the script about 5 years ago and wrapped production last summer. Spent the last year in post production, and then just finished it. So it's ready to be shared with the world tonight.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And this story, Serenity, it's based on the true story of your family. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah. My sister Jessica, she struggled with addiction for a large part of her life, and she ultimately passed away about 18 years ago, which is hard to believe it's been that long. Um, and so in the film, it's a non-linear structure that travels through time and moments and fleeting glimpses of all of our lives, before and after her passing, um, and explores both addiction from the lens of the person addicted, which is often seen in cinema, and even more so through the perspective of the family that is impacted, which I think is a part of that story that could be shared a bit more.
Mm-hmm.
And really, I think a lot of storytellers in film are tackling grief and loss, especially since the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's become more common, and a lot of people are going through it, and so it feels timely to share a story that will hopefully be a catalyst for conversations and normalizing this inevitable reality that we all will face in losing someone, and how we keep living,
Mm-hmm.
keep going.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for sharing that, and I'm sorry. I'm, despite it having been so many years since your passing, I'm sorry for your loss.
No, thank you.
How does it feel to share this story with the world?
It's been a fascinating and cathartic journey, from the conception of the idea to make a film about it to I actually wrote the script after my father passed away 5 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I had always been impacted or thought about my sister's passing, obviously, but the idea to create a visual story about it happened after my father died, and needing an outlet, I just got to writing as a means of processing. And I remember just typing in tears,
Yeah.
but in doing so, I felt like it was some of the most truthful and honest and vulnerable writing I've ever produced.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so from there, really just to bring people together to tell the story, and everyone involved, from the incredible cast and crew, were so deeply invested in it because they saw how important it was for
Mm-hmm.
me
Mm-hmm.
to do justice to this story.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't possibly make a bad film about this,
Mm-hmm.
right? And and we became a family. Everyone in the cast and crew has repeatedly voiced that we became a little family.
Mm.
Just a beautiful thing. And now to watch my memories, both some of the most precious and loving, and some of the most traumatic, on screen, is pretty surreal,
Hmm.
actually. Yeah.
Hmm. Wow. How did you decide on the people who would be acting in your film?
Yeah, that was, I'd say, pre-production. If As I voiced in the timeline of things, was a slow process. Just like, um, nothing without intention, right?
Mm.
And especially something of this magnitude. And so,
Right.
I actually started by filming a scene that was improvised dialogue with non-actors, and they were all uh, connected through my work in, recovery.
Mm-hmm.
And so a colleague of mine is a leader in the NA community in the Twin Cities. And so I spoke with him about setting up a scene with members of NA here, um, non-actors, and with the prompt of the intersection of grief, loss, and addiction and recovery.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the first thing we shot. And so I think rooting it in just that reality, they didn't have any lines. I had a line. Um, I am in the film in the
Okay.
end.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had a line, and then that just kind of prompted this organic, improvised conversation, which we captured. And I think that really rooted it in truth. And so from there, it was, the thought around that was to film that, use that scene for, getting funding to finish it. And instead, I just said, I'm just going to do it myself.
Mm.
And so I saved money, and then I went through an agency that I have a relationship with in town here, Wayman, Models and Talent, and they're friends. And so they really, went, uh, and supported me, and
Mm-hmm.
put out a call, and it was pretty wild. I mean, I I was so blessed to have the folks reach out that did, because they were almost just too perfect to. Um, Ali Eloanle, who plays, my mother in the film, um, the warmest, just most loving individual, and she has this like short, kind of like my hair, haircut,
Mm-hmm.
and at the time, my actual mother is in the film as well, and she just went through chemo,
Hmm.
and so she has a short haircut like this, like Ali,
Mm-hmm.
but gray.
Mm.
And so just visually, the leap in time was perfect, not to mention just the love and the personalities there. And
Yeah.
so
Wow.
I got really lucky with casting. Yeah.
Mm. Wow, that's amazing. Um, well, and in talking about that too, you talk a little bit about how the community has just shown up for you, and I find that to be kind of a way that certain arts communities in the Twin Cities, that's just the behavior. It's like show up, show up. Um, can you talk about that a little bit more with this film?
Yeah. I mean, I think here, and we could even speak on it a bit if we talk about public functionary and kind of the ecosystem that we have here,
Mm-hmm.
and that, um, yeah, we really show up for each other, and I'm often reminded when folks show up for me, I show up for them, and we support each other, that we have everything we need. right here,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
in this little bubble. It's a beautiful thing,
Mm.
and I hope and I believe that in the process that the cast and crew had in being a part of this, that they learned and grew and connected and healed in a way that, um, for me, going through and doing the work of being a counselor for folks in recovery, telling the story like it's all part of the healing process,
Mm-hmm.
um, in helping others heal.
Mm-hmm.
And again, it's this cyclical thing, uh, analogous to the way artists in the community show up for each other, and it's like it's this love that just emanates between all of us, and so I'm just like so grateful that in creating this that was manifested.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Hmm. You mentioned your mom. I wonder, so has she seen this film yet? Or is this the first time that she's going to see it tonight?
Yeah, she saw it. So she had a part in the
Mm-hmm.
film. She obviously had a lot of say in the story, and talking to the cast about going through these things that they were portraying
Mm-hmm.
on screen.
Mm-hmm.
She also, her official title is costume
Oh,
designer,
nice.
um, which was, a deep process, like finding wardrobe for her late daughter,
Mm,
right?
wow. Yeah.
When she was 16, like going to thrift stores and finding things, and even having a jacket that was Jessica's,
Yeah.
and,
Wow.
and using that in the film. And so, like,
That's
yeah,
heavy.
it's heavy. It's yeah, and powerful,
Mm,
and I think again it just shows that kind of level of intention. Um, but in addition to like my own personal like thought, which I shared, like there's no way I could have made this film poorly. There's
right.
no way I could have made it and not gotten the approval of my Chinese mother. It never would have seen the light of day if she said it was bad, and if it was bad, she would have told
Yeah.
me. Yeah. So
That's
she
funny.
saw it. She approved. I'm sure you can relate.
That's hilarious. I mean, yeah, I think we all. I would say that my mom is. Uh, she gives her approval. It's maybe a little bit different, but yeah, that is like an Asian family thing. Asian mom.
Definitely.
um. Wow, what was it like to see your past and your family's past come alive in front of you?
It was profound.
Mm,
I probably at moments could have done a better job as a director. I mean, I remember watching a scene, and Allie and Clay, who plays younger me, they were like, "Do you have any notes?" And I was just like, near tears
yeah.
and
Yeah,
speechless.
yeah.
And when I was acting, I was like, stumbling over my words, even though they're like things that I actually said, because
Right.
I've been thinking a lot about, operating from here and here,
Mm-hmm.
pointing to my heart and my head, and the process of directing this was a dance
Yeah.
between those.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and so it was profound. Like I said, some watching, some of my most traumatic memories play out, and some of the most beautiful.
Mm.
It's a trip.
Hmm. And when did you do the editing?
It did. It
Mm.
was such an incredible cast. I edited the work, but I had an amazing team on sound. Grant Cutler, I don't know if you're familiar with Grant. Incredible composer and musician, created the original score,
Mm.
which I feel just really pulls out the emotions in many scenes.
Mm-hmm.
Spencer Joles did the sound design and dialogue mastering, which just the additional layers of those sounds in the film just like really, bring everything out. And Nolan Maurice, who was the cinematographer, director of photography, did the color on it, and we worked together in collaboration on the feel, as this is somewhat of a period piece.
Yeah.
It should evoke nostalgia of like 90s,
Mm-hmm.
and so adding texture and grain and colors that evoke that feeling. So
Mm.
yeah, it's just like an all-around team effort, and there's no way this could have made it without just all the talented people involved.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I'm curious about the decision making that you had to exercise when you were doing edits. And like, what did you already know exactly what you wanted to have in the film, and you were just editing around takes, or were you deciding more what would stay in the film and what would be cut?
Hmm. Yeah, so like kind of multiple pieces to that answer. One tied to my previous comment about like how I might have potentially improved as a director. I didn't allow much coverage. I think I was just really caught up
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
things. We got some incredible content, but not a lot of coverage. And so in post, we were somewhat limited at
Mm-hmm.
times with what we had.
Mm-hmm.
That was a piece. Also, like the emotional tie I have to the content,
Right.
and and so what I did was I started. I took like I think like 6 months where I didn't even look at it, and then
Yeah.
I was like, okay, I'm ready. I think it was like winter. I was like, let's do this now.
Oh,
Um,
in the bleak months of
yeah,
winter.
yeah, and I did a long cut, and I think it was over 20 minutes, and so the process in that was like, again, things that I felt emotionally tied to,
Mm-hmm.
wanting to keep that while keeping in mind I would like this to get more eyes on it, as any artist would, and so thinking about the programmability of a short film, 20 minutes is not programmable as much as a 14-minute
Mm.
film is, which is what we ended on.
Mm-hmm.
And so Nolan helped me look at the long cut and make what he called some brutal cuts, and but it was a smooth process actually.
Mm-hmm.
Like he said, you can get rid of that, you can get rid of this, and
Mm-hmm.
we didn't fight about it.
Mm-hmm.
I agreed,
Mm-hmm.
and I think it's much tighter
Mm-hmm.
in what we have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, maybe in a way it's like your emotional attachment to the material, having somebody else come in and just, say like, this is how we make the story flow,
Yeah.
and then you can just let go of, you can still have those other pieces, but they don't
Hmm.
necessarily, like everything that you're attached to doesn't necessarily have to be in the final.
Absolutely.
Mm.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's a 14-minute um, short film.
Yep, just over 14
Mm-hmm.
minutes.
Um, I want to ask too, and again, I'm sorry for your loss of your father, um, but I wanted to ask, uh, in the context of this film, did you have a character who played your father, and what was that like to see that play out on screen?
In the original script, I examined both of their deaths,
Mm-hmm.
and I revised it multiple times, and I realized this is kind of a segue from the previous comment about not having to show and share everything.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, does this make sense to a viewer watching a film,
Mm-hmm.
right? As opposed to me telling my story and every ounce of truth in it, right? And so I ultimately removed a lot of the father's story, specifically his death,
Mm.
because it just structurally in a story, it was like it made less sense.
Mm.
And I felt that if I was going to tell a story about him, I didn't want to be this almost side story that
Right.
I wanted to do justice to him as well.
Right.
So ultimately, I included him in the film because obviously it's the story of my family, but it was a lot more left to, I guess, mystery,
Hmm.
and very minimal lines. And it was almost telling. I don't know. It could be an affirmation of the decision or serendipity. I don't know. But when casting for him, I wasn't able to get anyone.
Hmm.
And so I ended up asking a friend of mine who's not an actor, and said, you have one very intense scene with no dialogue, and then you have one line of dialogue.
Hmm.
And he agreed to do it. And so it worked out. I think one day I will explore and touch on my father's story specifically, but in this one, we just share his love for his family,
Hmm.
and leave a bit more open ended.
Hmm. Hmm. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
Um, so you have a background in social work, and I can't help but wonder how that plays into the real life story that you tell in the film. But you know, you mention in your biography that you've had 15 years of experience in social work, but your sister passed 18 years ago. So I'm wondering um, if that played in as a factor.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I mean, I have a line, or Clay has a line in the film, where he's saying, I don't know why I thought I could be a doctor.
Hmm.
I'm like failing all my classes, and his friends are like, yeah, you smoke way too much weed to be a doctor. And
I think
you
there are
know
doctors
it,
who smoke weed, by the
yeah,
way.
for sure, even more now.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right.
um and I think like that is like a snippet into, sharing that, like, I, I had this path that I thought I was supposed to go on as a, this Chinese boy in high school, and like, like that's what you do, and it wasn't it. And then in high school, it's like my sister was going through it and then died, and so
Yeah.
it kind of just threw everything off.
Mm.
And but in the end, like, um, in a way, her passing helped me find purpose, right?
Mhm.
And so that's where I ended up. And although I'm not doing group therapy or working in direct service, a lot of the community building and community aspect of that work, and what she helped me find is definitely present in everything I do
Mhm.
today.
Mhm.
Not to mention the filmmaking, because she was a filmmaker.
Oh, she was.
Yeah, so it's yeah, it's it's
Mm.
it's a lot to reflect on, like all the ways that she has impacted me, before and after she passed away.
Mhm. Was she older than you?
Yeah, she was 6 years older.
Mhm. Hmm.
Mhm.
Would you mind sharing a little bit more about your background in social work and how it's impacted your ways of thinking around collaboration and community care, and also how that interconnects with your creative practice?
Yeah, yeah. I didn't go to film school,
Mhm.
um, so I think about this often. I've moved beyond imposter syndrome, because there's a lot of
Yeah.
layers to this work. And so I think a lot about, everything from community organizing to, I mentioned group therapy. I used to, some of the best years of my life, spent every morning. I would make breakfast and coffee and open up a space, and it would be anywhere from 5 to 35 folks who may have slept under a bridge, slept in a shelter,
Mhm.
slept in their apartment,
Mhm.
um, but currently or formerly unhoused, currently or formerly experiencing addiction,
Mhm.
currently or in the recent past under the influence.
Mhm.
And it was a space that, regardless, you could be there if you were there to be there and share and connect and be respectful. It was some of the best years of my life, some of the best work I've ever done.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, I think a lot about like that, and just like working with multiple people and personalities, and creating something like bigger than all of us as individuals. Cause like the collective of the feeling of that room was like powerful.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, in some ways that's analogous to filmmaking, or the work we're doing at Public Functionary.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's both leading and supporting something, but also letting go of control and allowing the collective to make something together. Um, and that work definitely has helped me in my art and my community practice and filmmaking.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you for sharing that too, Ryan.
Mhm.
You touched on it a little bit, but I wanted to get into your position as the director of community programming and the PF Cafe at Public Functionary. Can you share a little bit about how you became involved at Public Functionary and the arts ecosystem that exists there?
Yeah, God, it was over 10 years ago. Trisha Herring and Mike Bishop had a gallery and community space in Northeast Minneapolis, and it just felt very different, the space from most art spaces in town.
Mm-hmm.
And I started to build a relationship with them, and this was when I was social working and moonlighting as an artist. So like I'd get out of work and go shoot a music video or something. And so wasn't fully committed, and not really even knowing what committed meant, right?
Yeah.
Just figuring it
Yeah.
out.
Just jumping in.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, they were so affirming and supportive of like me experimenting with that, and building a community around it. And I think that's a big part of their philosophy. In Artists need an audience in the community, obviously, for their work to continue.
Mm.
And so they really help cultivate that with space and supporting artists and curating space for it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I did some group shows and some things that at their old space. And then in kind of about 4, maybe 5 years ago, Leslie Barlow partnered with them as they were transitioning from that space to start a studio program for BIPOC emerging artists. And then they all transitioned into the Northrop King building where I'm currently at.
Mm-hmm.
And so the studio program really was the only like physical space that existed at a time for Public Functionary. And so Leslie is director of the studio program, and it started with 9 artists in one studio, which they subsidize rent on the studio space, and they provide mentorship and support and community building.
Mm-hmm.
It has now grown to over 30 artists
Mm-hmm.
in 5 studios. And then once that became this thriving program, then Public Functionary said, okay, now we need to revisit a gallery space, community space. I had this hope of creating an art space that incorporated food
Mm-hmm.
into it. And I was initially in a fellowship to really plan out and make it happen in South Minneapolis. It felt like there was a need with a loss of some spaces in South.
Mm-hmm.
And when the pandemic and uprising happened, it all changed. And so I had a conversation with Leslie and Mike and Trisha about collaborating instead of what might have been competition.
Mm. Mm.
And so now we're sitting in the cafe, which is next to one of our 2 galleries in Public Functionary, which is in the same building as the 5 studios. And we're all figuring it out
Uh-huh.
together.
Uh-huh. And it's expanding more and more.
Yeah. Yeah. So that was the very long answer
No,
of
that's
that's
fine. Long answers are nice.
yeah.
That's really cool. Um, what's your vision for the PF Cafe?
We recently came to a collective realization as a group, meaning mostly the staff of the cafe who also overlap with the studio program. A lot of the artists in the studio
Mm,
program work in the
that
cafe.
makes sense.
That instead of having like this traditional restaurant and hierarchy of an executive chef, that we start a chef residency
Hmm.
program.
Oh, cool.
And so it's been really exciting to start to ideate on that and connect with chefs who don't have a brick and mortar space that they can be creative in.
Mm-hmm.
So we have 3 chefs lined up now, and the first is starting actually any day.
Hmm.
And it's super exciting because his name's Scott, and he makes steaks at Murray's every day,
Nice.
and like by a broiler, like just hot. And he, when I talked to him about this, he was like, "Oh my god, I have so many ideas. I want to do something different besides broil a steak, right?" And I think it really works here because uh, my vision, long story short, is to support folks, create a space for connection and for people to meet and eat and like kind of stay a while in the gallery.
Oh, yeah.
And also to like be an incubator, much like the studio program, but this way for chefs.
Right. Which is, I think, I don't know of anything that's like that. In
Right?
fact,
I
yeah,
don't.
I don't know.
Yeah, I mean it's kind of risky, but the way I look at this space as compared to other food spaces is let's not try to be a food space because we're not.
Right.
We're an art space that serves food,
Uh-huh.
and this space is always
Mm-hmm.
shifting. So let's shift the menu, and that's part of the excitement.
Mm-hmm.
And I think honestly, the more we differentiate from other restaurants, it's probably to our advantage
Mm-hmm.
because we're not the same at all.
Yeah, and I think the objective is different too. It's not about like making a business um out of that incubator per se. It's just like let's give these chefs room to play and within a small framework, and that framework can be nimble because of its size and the energy around it.
Absolutely. And and the other thing is like if we do make profit, which we haven't yet, we broke even, which is a blessing.
That's good.
But
Breaking even is great.
oh yes, it was hard to do that.
You did
But if
it.
we do,
Congrats.
we did it. I'm happy. I'm proud. If we do make profit, the intention from the
Mhm.
beginning was to funnel it back into the programming and the nonprofit. So
Right.
again, it's that ecosystem.
Right.
So yeah,
Yeah, well, and the PF Cafe is pretty new from what I understand, and you know, perhaps there will be more growth there in terms of people coming through, and that will help too.
yeah, yeah. I think so. It already has felt like that. It's I have a I've learned a lifetime of lessons and us being open 3 months.
That's good.
Yeah,
Where do you connect with the chefs that you engage for the residencies?
we have a lot of crossover with food and chefs in our community.
Hmm.
So an artist in our community, Shay Mays, he is our restaurant consultant and he is also a chef. So he'll step in and he made an incredible menu for Art World. He made crab cake sandwiches and shrimp and grits and so he does a lot of that. He's the food safety man
Hmm.
restaurant world. Kenichi Thomas, who's a DJ and a producer with Public Functionary, is also a chef, and so he actually connected me with Scott, who's going to be our first resident. And then there's a few others that just through, community that I've built relationships with. Kenji Yi, he used to host something called the Shui Project. So in his apartment, he would make incredible food, invite artists to come in and share their art and just feed people by donation. And
Hmm.
so I've been talking to him since the start of this because it's like so much alignment in the vision of this space. And so he's also going to be one of the chefs. And So yeah, I'm just lucky to have them in proximity to us already.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Will there ever be an open call?
Absolutely. We also have considered like partnering with culinary schools.
Mm. Oh,
So
that's a great idea.
yeah, what an opportunity! Because like, as much as I like to think this is a relatively simple operation, we do have a cafe, a catering company, and a food truck. So it's actually like uh, the amount of like ways to learn and gain hands-on experiences in a lot of different ways is pretty big. So I think for
Mm-hmm.
someone in culinary school, maybe we could put an open call there, and then I would think they would be interested.
Hmm. Cool. Um, Last November, you self-published a photo book that examines Asian American masculinity. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, that was when you shared the grant you got for this, which is awesome. I'm so glad that you got that. That project was grant funded from the Minnesota State Arts Board, and the intention was to create a photographic archive examining Asian American masculinity, and it resulted in the book
Mm-hmm.
at the end of it. So I was thinking a lot about it. Those intersections of topics were in such a fascinating time, both for Asian American folks and also in regards to gender identity, toxic
Mm-hmm.
masculinity.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so, yeah, it was something that I think in this moment needed to be addressed specifically. It's a very specific book, right? But
Yeah.
I also feel like it needed to be that specific. And the
Mm-hmm.
conversations, both creating it and after sharing it, have been felt really affirming and important.
Hmm. And in the book, you're interviewing several Asian American um, individuals. Can you tell us about some of the stories that you encountered and how that played out with the rest of the book?
Yeah. Um, that process was so great. It was like over a year, a lot of just like taking walks and talking to people,
Mm-hmm.
and and people saying that like they've never had that conversation before.
Yeah.
Yeah, never. No one ever asked me
Right.
about those parts of my identity, which is like crazy, right? I mean,
It is
it,
crazy.
it might have something to do with why men have as many problems as we do right now, right? Um,
We've all got problems, Ryan.
yeah,
But yeah, I know what you're saying. I know what you're saying.
yeah. But it was great because I'd say maybe 15% of the conversations I had did not result in a photo and an interview in the book,
Okay.
and that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
And then others did. So like the process was like reaching out to friends and people I was really close to already, um,
Mm-hmm.
having a conversation, having another conversation, following up to think about both what we had talked about in those conversations and then like how do we like create a visual concept around that, so it's
Mm-hmm.
kind of like two parts. And then after the shoot, recording a conversation, the interview, and transcribing it, and then showing the photos, showing the interview, making sure they're in alignment and approved by each individual, and
Mm-hmm.
then putting them into a book, and then ultimately having a release and a conversation, which like I was so grateful. Like I think maybe 50, 60 people came and wanted to talk about that head on. So
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Were the individuals that you spoke with and included in the book, um, were they mostly artists or from all walks of life?
all walks of life, yeah. It
Mm-hmm.
was it was a really, which I think was great, because
Mm-hmm.
I didn't have a point that I was trying to make in putting the book together other than like we are abundant, right? We're not like what you might think. And so there's everything from like a PhD candidate kickboxer to someone who just got out of prison and now works in a treatment center
Mm-hmm.
to, yeah, I mean, it was, we are everything and anything, right?
Right, right.
Yeah. And just thinking, I was thinking really intentionally about across the diaspora. I'm very aware as a mixed race Chinese person to
Mm-hmm.
not, I don't want to say not, but to be aware of centering East Asian privilege and especially
Mm.
mixed race East Asian privilege. And so I interviewed a lot of Southeast Asian folks. I talked to South Asian people who often get erased from the conversation about Asian American identity.
Right.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
and so really making sure that I captured a range across the diaspora.
Yeah, yeah. Show the breadth of the community.
Mm-hmm.
Um, did you notice any through lines in how people responded to your questions about Asian American masculinity?
Yeah, there's definitely quite a few. I think something consistent was what we were taught and observed and told as younger people, and maybe even particularly of my generation. I'm an aging millennial, and I could argue it's one of the worst times to grow up as an Asian American man.
Interesting. Yeah.
The 90s were like kind of shitty for toxic masculinity.
Mm.
So it was like a lot of that, like a lot of like, I was told as an Asian American boy growing up that I was, fill in the blank of negative trope, to
Mm-hmm.
um, being empowered to break free from that now,
Mm-hmm.
and a desire to change that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Um, Speaking for myself, I feel like the last handful of years, I mean, really the last handful of years, uh, Asian Americans have been getting a lot more recognition in the media and in the arts. Um, how do you feel about that? And can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, it's like a fascinating time, right?
Mm-hmm.
I was just talking to someone about beef.
Yeah. What'd you think of that?
It was, yeah. I mean, well, the specific thing, I said two things. I was like, it's too bad that they were aware of that actor who was a
Mm,
rapist and still cast him, because that tainted the show. But maybe we'll save that. But as far as the growth from like Crazy Rich Asians to a story that's this like complex and nuanced, and
mm-hmm. A little more raw.
yeah, was like really powerful. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
it was just like really incredible writing, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm excited to see how this continues.
Mm-hmm. I mean, speaking again for myself, I enjoyed watching a show that was about Asian Americans that didn't pigeonhole them into a stereotype.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like that prior to the last even 5 years, um that was not the case. It was all about like I don't know, exoticism and or like the the trope of being the model minority or
Mm-hmm.
um so it meant a lot to me to see this show where like that was not like Asian Americans weren't being used in this way, you know.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And I don't know, maybe we don't have to go back to Serenity, but just to
We
that,
can, yeah, go ahead.
but to that point, I think
Mm.
like, I don't know if I've ever seen a film about a Chinese family experiencing addiction.
Mm.
Because like I'm just picturing like someone pitching that in Hollywood even 5 years ago, and they'd be like, "What?" Like,
Yeah, that doesn't happen to Chinese Americans.
yeah, right. And
Right.
and I think like where we go from here, hopefully, is just like this. There's something really powerful like about not only breaking free from tropes and being the way we have been casted and pigeonholed, but also just like making really powerful stories about people and families.
Mm-hmm.
And almost it's like their racial identity as an Asian American family is an afterthought, or like is secondary to that human story. and
Mm-hmm.
and that can be as powerful or more powerful than anything as far as gaining empathy and
Mm-hmm.
understanding across communities, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you're a Columbia Heights native.
Yeah.
Can you share a little bit about your experiences growing up in the Twin Cities and um, how that influenced you as an adult and in your creative practice?
Yeah. Columbia Heights. Columbia Heights is an interesting. It's a first tier suburb of Minneapolis. I grew up across the street from Northeast Minneapolis. Columbia Heights has it's a city within its city,
Mm-hmm.
a trailer community named Hilltop.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we have a lot of good food and restaurants. Um, yeah, I think it's a diverse community in race and socioeconomic status. I liked growing up there. I remember when I was younger, through my mom's employment circumstances, there was a moment when we may have potentially moved to New York,
Mm-hmm.
and we didn't do that. And then some people in, I think my mom's field of work, my mom worked in like uh, uh, commercial print, and she was a makeup artist and like advertising
Mm-hmm.
sometimes. And some people like would make comments like, "Why do you live there?"
Hmm.
And she would ask us, "Do you want to move?" It's like, no. And like,
They would make comments to you or to your mom?
it's my mom.
Okay.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. Because it's like it's never. I think in the '70s it was kind of like an Edina, but it's not seen as like this suburb where you strive to move to.
Right.
But I would not trade that for anything, and yeah, I appreciated growing up there and the experiences I had, and um, yeah, there weren't a ton of other Asian kids, but
Mm-hmm.
yeah, but no, it's a good place to be.
Mm-hmm. Uh, Growing up in a community that didn't have a lot of other Asian kids, did you feel that um, the disparity of that, or how did that affect things?
I think so, and I talk about it a little bit in the book on
Mm-hmm.
Asian American masculinity. Um,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, and truthfully, that those experiences might have happened if I grew up anywhere at that time,
Right. Mm-hmm.
but they may have been exacerbated a bit by being in a place that didn't have a lot of uh, other Asian students.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, I think it's fascinating to think about that in retrospect, not only just like in my growth in my identity journey, but um, also just in societies, like some of the fighting kids at the bus stop for calling me a gook, which is like
Ugh.
it was so weird. I remember thinking about it like that was taught to you, right? Because like that, I feel like even that terminology when it was at like 95 or something, that was like slurs used like post Vietnam, right? Like it's just weird. Like why is this kid calling me this?
This kid is late to the party, man.
Yeah, yeah. But someone obviously taught him that.
Well, yeah, for sure.
But again, like I said, that may have happened if I grew up anywhere in 1995 because it was like a weird, it was a weird time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Hmm. Who or what are you inspired by?
I'm inspired by my wife Leslie. So Leslie Barlow's, who started the studio program at Public Functionary, is the director of the studio program here.
Mm-hmm.
We ended up collaborating as artists and getting married. And
Such a sweet story.
yeah, yeah, and what a way to like start a relationship, because it was, started by being inspired by her.
Uh-huh.
And yeah, she inspires me every day. She's like one of the hardest working artists I know, and
Mm.
and she's just brilliant, prolific, and motivates me. Um, not only in her work, but yeah, in her community building, right? And
Mm-hmm.
um, yeah, I mean, there's just so many people around me in this community that I get to see every day. I love that, even if it's just like passing in the hallway or they come and get a coffee in the cafe. Like, I'm inspired by like the energy here. It's like the lifeblood that we're all moving and hustling and creating,
Mm-hmm.
and that keeps us all going. I think it's like reciprocal, and we feed off of each other in that way.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm very grateful for that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Can I pause for 1 second? Someone is
Yeah,
dropping something off. All right, 1 second.
for sure.
It's funny that Nolan was doing like a final color treatment, and he tried to send me the file digitally,
Uh-huh.
but for Serenity, but couldn't. And
Uh-huh.
so someone just, this is Serenity for tonight. just got brought to me at 11:07.
Right. FYI, everyone, everything happens last minute.
No matter how prepared you are, 5 years
Oh
ahead
my
of time.
goodness.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember like getting a file from like a final cut edit from somebody like 30 minutes before a show, and I was like, "Oh." It's so stressful, but sometimes, that's just how it goes. It's really funny.
Yeah.
Um if people want to see your work or pick up your book or just learn more about you, where is a good place for them to find that information?
My website, just my name.com.
Can you say
Yeah, just
it?
ryanstopera.com. I sold out of books. If folks are local, there are still a few copies at the Eastside Freedom Library.
Okay,
Um,
great.
yeah, yeah.
Awesome. Well, Ryan, thank you so much. It was really great to speak with you.
It was, yeah, really, really incredible to sit down and talk. And I hope the next time we do, I can ask you some questions, because I want to get to know
We'll
you
break
more.
it down.
Yeah. But thank you for inviting me. Seriously.
Thank you, Ryan. And to our audience, thank you for listening. This has been another edition of the Sanguine Arts Locavart podcast.